They laughed when a quiet Korean father walked into the bodyguard tryout, calling him weak and saying he belonged at home with his daughter. Then the academy's strongest fighter stepped forward and challenged him. Nobody expected what happened next. In just 3 seconds, the man everyone mocked was standing while the champion was on the floor. But his secret was even more shocking. The parking lot outside Blackstone Security Academy was already packed before sunrise. Expensive cars lined the street, and one by one, confident men stepped through the gates wearing training clothes, tactical boots, and the kind of body language that made it clear they believed they belonged there. This was not an ordinary job interview. Blackstone was looking for new bodyguards, and only the strongest and smartest candidates would make it through the final test. Among the applicants were former soldiers, professional fighters, martial artists, and men who had spent years protecting wealthy clients. Then, just before the doors closed, a quiet Korean man walked through the entrance carrying an old black backpack. His name was Joon-Ho Park. He was in his late 30s, had short black hair, a tired face, and wore a simple grey hoodie, dark pants, and worn sneakers. He didn't look like a bodyguard. He looked like a father who had rushed out of the house after getting his child ready for school. A few men looked him up and down before laughing under their breath. One of them nudged his friend and said, "Are they hiring dads now?" Another laughed and asked, "You sure you're in the right building?" Joon-Ho heard every word, but he said nothing. He simply walked to the registration desk and placed his papers in front of the receptionist. The woman looked at his application and raised an eyebrow. "You have a daughter?" she asked. Joon-Ho nodded. "She's 8. And you're applying for executive protection?" He nodded again. "Yes." Behind him, another candidate laughed. "Man, you should be applying for a school pickup job." A few people laughed with him. Joon-Ho lowered his eyes for a moment, not because he was ashamed, but because he was thinking about the little girl waiting for him at home. Her name was Hana, and she was the reason he had come. Since his wife passed away, Joon-Ho had raised Hana alone. Money was tight, bills were piling up, and he needed a job that could give his daughter a safer future. He wasn't there to prove he was the toughest man in the room. He wasn't there to impress anybody. He simply needed one chance. The head instructor, Marcus Reed, watched him from across the room. Unlike the others, Marcus wasn't laughing. Something about Joon-Ho's calmness bothered him. Men who had nothing to hide usually defended themselves when people mocked them. Joon-Ho didn't. He just stood there quietly, waiting for the test to begin. Marcus looked at the clock, then at the applicants. "Everyone outside, first test starts now." The room suddenly became serious. The jokes stopped. And nobody in that building knew that within minutes, the same men laughing at Joon-Ho would start wondering who they had just underestimated. The first physical test started with a 5-mile run around the academy grounds, followed by a series of sprints, push-ups, and heavy bag drills. The candidates took off like they were fighting for something bigger than a job. Joon-Ho stayed near the back, moving at a steady pace. He wasn't gasping for air and he wasn't struggling, but he also wasn't trying to race anyone. That was enough to make the other men laugh again. One candidate named Tyler looked over his shoulder and shouted, "Come on, Dad, my grandmother runs faster than you." The men around him laughed. Joon-Ho didn't answer. He kept running. When the group reached the obstacle course, things got harder. Candidates had to climb a wall, crawl under wire, carry heavy bags, and finish with a timed sprint. Most of the men attacked the course with everything they had. Joon-Ho moved differently. He was controlled. He didn't waste energy and every movement looked planned. Still, because he wasn't showing off, the others assumed he was weak. Tyler finished ahead of him and stood near the end of the course with his arms crossed. "You sure you want to keep going?" he asked. "This isn't a father and daughter picnic." A few men laughed again. Joon-Ho simply nodded. "I'm fine." That calm answer seemed to irritate Tyler more than any insult could have. Then came the strength test. Each candidate had to lift and carry a heavy training bag across the floor. Joon-Ho picked his up without saying a word and walked forward. He didn't move quickly, but he never stopped. When he reached the finish line, he placed the bag down gently. Marcus Reed, the head instructor, watched carefully. Joon-Ho's score wasn't the highest, but it wasn't low either. It was almost as if he was deliberately staying in the middle. Marcus noticed something else too. Joon-Ho kept watching the other candidates instead of watching himself. He was studying their footwork, their breathing, and the way they reacted when they became tired. That wasn't normal behavior for a beginner. During the next break, Tyler walked over and stood directly in front of him. "You know you're wasting everybody's time, right?" he said. Joon-Ho looked at him calmly. "I came here for a job." Tyler smiled. "Then maybe you should find a job that doesn't involve protecting people." Joon-Ho said nothing. He reached into his backpack, pulled out a bottle of water, and looked at a small photograph tucked inside the front pocket. It was a picture of Hana smiling beside him. For just a second, his expression softened. Then he put the photograph away. Marcus saw it from across the room. He still didn't know Joon-Ho's story, but he was beginning to understand one thing. This man wasn't here to prove himself. He was here because someone at home was depending on him. And when the next test was announced, Marcus noticed Joon-Ho's eyes change for the first time. The next test was designed to separate people who looked strong from people who could actually handle pressure. The candidates were taken into a large training room where the walls were covered with padded mats, climbing ropes, heavy bags, and training equipment. Marcus Reed stood in front of them with a stopwatch in his hand and explained that this round would test speed, balance, reaction time, and control. The first challenge was simple on paper. Each candidate had to move through a series of obstacles while avoiding swinging pads and grabbing 3 marked targets along the way. The fastest time would earn the highest score. One by one, the candidates went through the course. Tyler moved quickly and finished near the top. Several former fighters performed even better, and the room filled with cheers whenever someone posted a strong time. Then Marcus called Joon-Ho's name. A few candidates started laughing before he even stepped forward. Tyler shook his head and said, "Don't hurt yourself, Dad." Joon-Ho ignored him and walked to the starting line. Marcus looked at him carefully. "Ready?" Joon-Ho nodded. The timer started. Suddenly something changed. Joon-Ho moved with a speed nobody expected. He ducked under the first swinging pad, stepped around the second, caught the first target, and moved through the next section without wasting a single step. He wasn't moving like a man trying to show off. Every movement was short, clean, and controlled. Before most of the candidates could react, he reached the final target and stopped the clock. The room went quiet. Marcus looked at the time and then looked back at Joon-Ho. His score was one of the fastest of the entire morning. Tyler's smile disappeared. "Lucky," he muttered. Joon-Ho didn't respond. The next test involved reaction speed. Candidates had to respond to flashing lights and sudden sounds while protecting a training dummy behind them. Several men reacted too quickly and made mistakes. Others became frustrated when the signals changed without warning. Joon-Ho remained calm. He waited, watched, and reacted only when necessary. Again, he finished near the top. Marcus finally walked over to him. "Where did you learn to move like that?" he asked. Joon-Ho paused. "A long time ago." Marcus waited for more, but Joon-Ho said nothing else. The instructor could tell there was a story behind those words. During the final exercise, the candidates were told to defend themselves against a moving training target. Joon-Ho's eyes immediately focused on its balance and movement instead of its size. Tyler watched him from the side, clearly annoyed. He had spent years building a reputation as the strongest man in the room, and now this quiet single father was making people question it without saying a word. When the test ended, Marcus called everyone together. "Tomorrow," he announced, "we begin close combat testing." Tyler smiled again. This time his eyes were locked on Joon-Ho. "Finally," he said. Joon-Ho looked at him calmly. He already knew what was coming. The next morning the training room felt different. Nobody was joking now. The candidates had learned that the Bodyguard tryout was far harder than they expected, and every person still standing wanted the same thing, a spot on the final team. In the center of the room stood a large padded fighting area. Marcus Reed walked in carrying a clipboard and explained that this round would test close combat, balance, reaction time, and control. "You are not here to prove who can hurt somebody," Marcus said. "You are here to prove who can protect someone when things go bad." The candidates nodded, but one man clearly wasn't interested in Marcus's speech. His name was Kang Tae-soo. He was a former professional fighter, broad-shouldered, heavily built, and known around the academy for being the strongest man in the group. He had already beaten every opponent placed in front of him during previous training sessions. Even Marcus respected his ability. Tae-soo looked across the room and noticed Joon-Ho standing quietly near the wall. He smiled. "So when do I get to fight the dad?" A few candidates laughed. Joon-Ho looked over but didn't respond. Marcus continued calling out pairs for the sparring tests. Tae-soo kept watching Joon-Ho. Finally, he walked over and stood in front of him. "You've been hiding all morning," Tae-soo said. "You move well, but this isn't an obstacle course. Let's see what you can really do." Joon-Ho shook his head. "I'm not here to fight you." Tae-soo laughed. That's exactly what someone says when they know they'll lose. The room became quiet. Everyone turned toward them. Joon-Ho looked at Marcus. "Do I have to?" Marcus studied him for a moment before answering. "If you want this job, you have to be willing to face the people you may have to protect against." Joon-Ho slowly nodded. Tae-soo stepped onto the mat with a confident smile. Joon-Ho placed his backpack down and took off his hoodie. For the first time, the other candidates noticed that underneath the simple clothes was a lean, athletic build. Still, nobody knew what he was capable of. Tae-soo raised his hands. 3 seconds, he said with a grin. "That's all I'm giving you." Joon-Ho simply looked at him. You don't have to give me anything. That answer made the room even quieter. Marcus raised his hand and warned them to keep the sparring controlled. Tsu moved into position, ready to attack. Joon-Ho stood completely still, his breathing slow, his eyes focused. He wasn't angry, he wasn't nervous. He looked like a man who had already seen this kind of situation before. Marcus lowered his hand. Begin. Tsu exploded forward with a powerful first step. The other candidates leaned closer, expecting Joon-Ho to panic, but Joon-Ho didn't move, not yet. He waited until Tsu was almost within reach. And then, for the first time that morning, Marcus Reed smiled. He finally understood why this quiet father had been holding back. Tsu came at Joon-Ho like a man who had done this 1,000 times before. His first step was fast, his shoulders turned, and his right hand moved forward with enough force to make everyone around the mat believe the fight would be over almost instantly. Some of the candidates were already smiling. They expected Joon-Ho to panic. They expected him to fall back, protect his face, and somehow survive the next few seconds. But Joon-Ho did none of those things. He waited. At the last possible moment, he moved just enough to let Tsu's attack pass beside him. It happened so quickly that several people didn't even understand what they had seen. Joon-Ho caught Tsu's arm, turned his body, and used Tsu's own forward movement against him. Tsu lost his balance. Before he could recover, Joon-Ho shifted his weight, swept his leg, and guided him hard onto the padded mat. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. The room went completely silent. Tsu stared up at the ceiling, stunned. Joon-Ho was already standing beside him, breathing normally. Marcus Reed looked at the stopwatch in his hand. He had seen hundreds of fighters train, but the speed and control of that move were different. 3 seconds, someone whispered from the back of the room. Nobody laughed this time. Tsu slowly sat up, his pride clearly hurt more than his body. He looked at Joon-Ho and asked, "What was that?" Joon-Ho offered him his hand. "You moved too fast," he said calmly. Tsu stared at the hand for a moment before accepting it. The candidates were still trying to understand what had happened. One man who had mocked Joon-Ho the day before quietly said, "He didn't even fight him." Marcus heard the comment and nodded. "Exactly." He looked at the group. "That's what you're supposed to learn. A bodyguard doesn't win by proving he's stronger. He wins by controlling the situation." Tsu wasn't ready to accept that yet. He stepped forward again and said, "I wasn't ready." Marcus immediately stopped him. "That's enough." But Tsu's pride wouldn't let it go. He looked at Joon-Ho and said, "One more round." Joon-Ho shook his head. "No, scared?" Tsu asked. Joon-Ho looked him directly in the eyes. "No, I just don't need to prove it twice." That sentence hit harder than the takedown. For the first time, the room understood that Joon-Ho wasn't pretending to be humble. He genuinely didn't care about being the toughest man there. He had something else on his mind. Marcus walked toward him and quietly asked, "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Joon-Ho looked away for a moment. His face became serious. "Before my daughter was born," he said, "I had a different life." Then he picked up his backpack and walked off the mat. Nobody knew what he meant yet. But Marcus had a feeling the quiet father had just opened the door to a past much bigger than anyone in that room could imagine. After the 3-second fight, the room never felt the same. The men who had laughed at Joon-Ho the day before suddenly kept their distance, and even Tsu had stopped making jokes. But Marcus Reed couldn't let the question go. He waited until the other candidates left the training room, then found Joon-Ho sitting alone on a bench near the lockers. Joon-Ho was looking at the photograph of his daughter, Hana. Marcus stopped a few feet away and said, "You don't move like someone who learned to fight at a local gym." Joon-Ho slowly put the photograph back into his wallet. "I learned a long time ago." Marcus sat across from him. "Doing what?" For several seconds, Joon-Ho said nothing. Then he finally told Marcus that years earlier, before he became a father, he had worked in private security overseas. He had protected businessmen, government officials, and people whose names never appeared in the news. His training had been serious, and his job had taken him into places where one wrong decision could cost somebody their life. Marcus listened carefully. "So why did you leave?" he asked. Joon-Ho looked down at his hands. His voice became quieter. "My wife died." Marcus didn't interrupt. Joon-Ho explained that after her death, everything changed. He had a newborn daughter, no desire to continue living around danger, and a promise he had made to himself. He wanted Hana to grow up knowing her father was there for her, so he walked away from that life. He stopped taking security jobs, stopped traveling, and focused on raising his little girl. For years, he worked ordinary jobs and lived quietly. He didn't care if anyone knew what he had once been capable of, but life had become harder recently. Rent had increased, bills were piling up, and Hana was getting older. Joon-Ho needed stable work, and when he saw the opening at Blackstone Security, he knew his old skills might finally give him another chance. Marcus asked, "Why didn't you put your real experience on the application?" Joon-Ho gave a small smile. "Because I didn't want people hiring me because of my past. I wanted to know if I could still do the job." Marcus leaned back and studied him. "And that 3-second takedown?" Joon-Ho shrugged. "He gave me an opening." Marcus almost laughed. "Most people would have celebrated that." Joon-Ho looked at the photograph of Hana again. "I'm not most people anymore." That answer stayed with Marcus. Joon-Ho wasn't chasing fame, money, or respect. He was a father trying to build a safe future for his child. But Marcus also realized something else. If Joon-Ho's old skills were still this sharp after years away, then his past might be far more serious than he had admitted. Before they left, Marcus told him, "Tomorrow is the final test, and this time nobody will be trying to beat you." Joon-Ho looked up. "Then what will they be trying to do?" Marcus answered, "Keep the person you're protecting alive." Joon-Ho's expression changed. For the first time, he looked completely ready. The next morning, Blackstone Security Academy was unusually quiet. The jokes were gone, the confidence had disappeared, and every remaining candidate understood that the final test would decide who actually deserved the job. Marcus Reed led them into a large training building that looked nothing like the fighting room from the day before. In the center was a black luxury SUV surrounded by barriers, cameras, doors, and hidden training areas. Marcus stood beside the vehicle and looked at the candidates. "Forget everything you learned yesterday," he said. "This test isn't about who can fight the hardest. It's about who can keep another person safe." Each candidate would have to protect a VIP actor while moving through a simulated public attack. They were told that attackers could appear from anywhere, and they would have only seconds to react. The first team went in. Within minutes, the fake attackers rushed them from different directions. The bodyguards immediately started chasing the attackers, leaving the VIP exposed. The test ended quickly. Marcus shook his head. "You protected your pride, not your client." Another team made the same mistake. They were too focused on fighting. Then it was Joon-Ho's turn. He walked toward the vehicle with the same calm expression he had shown all week. The actor playing the VIP stepped out and followed him. Joon-Ho didn't look around nervously. Instead, he studied everything: the parked cars, windows, entrances, people standing nearby, and even the shadows between the buildings. Marcus watched from behind the glass. He knew Joon-Ho was searching for something. The simulation began. A loud crash came from the left. 2 attackers appeared. Joon-Ho immediately moved the VIP behind him and guided him toward cover. One attacker rushed forward. Joon-Ho blocked him without chasing him. Another attacker appeared from behind the SUV, but Joon-Ho had already noticed him. He pushed the VIP toward a safer position and used the vehicle as a barrier. Then something unexpected happened. The VIP actor suddenly collapsed to the ground, pretending to be injured. Several candidates watching from outside assumed Joon-Ho would panic. Instead, he dropped beside the man, checked his condition, and kept his body positioned between the VIP and the attackers. He wasn't trying to defeat everyone. He was buying time. Marcus smiled as he watched. "That's it," he whispered. Joon-Ho then spotted what nobody else had noticed: a second exit route blocked by an attacker pretending to be a civilian. He changed direction immediately and moved the VIP through another doorway. The simulation ended with a loud buzzer. Joon-Ho had completed the entire test without losing the VIP for even a second. Marcus walked into the training area and looked at the other candidates. "That's what a bodyguard does," he said. "You don't win the fight, you make sure the person behind you gets home." Joon-Ho simply nodded, but before he could leave, Marcus received a message on his radio. His expression suddenly became serious. The final test wasn't over yet. Marcus Reed walked back into the training room with a completely different expression on his face. The candidates could tell something had changed, but nobody knew what the message on his radio had said. He gathered everyone around the SUV and explained that the final simulation had one more stage. This time there would be no warning, no clear starting point, and no instructions telling them where the danger would come from. The candidates would have to think like real bodyguards. "A real threat doesn't announce itself," Marcus said. "If you need someone to tell you where the danger is, you're already too late." One by one, the remaining candidates were given another chance. They tried to watch every corner and stay ready for an attack, but most of them became so focused on possible threats that they forgot about the person they were supposed to protect. Joon-Ho was different. He understood that protection wasn't about staring at every person who looked suspicious. It was about understanding the entire environment. When his turn began, Joon-Ho walked beside the VIP and casually studied the surroundings. He noticed a delivery truck parked in an unusual place. He noticed a door that should have been locked was slightly open. Then he saw a man standing near the entrance who had been there for several minutes without moving. Nothing about the man looked dangerous, but something didn't feel right. Joon-Ho didn't confront him. Instead, he quietly changed the VIP's position and moved him closer to a secure wall. The suspicious man suddenly reached inside his jacket. Before anyone could react, Joon-Ho moved the VIP behind cover and stepped between them. The man pulled out a training weapon and the simulation erupted. Joon-Ho didn't chase him. He controlled the distance, blocked the attack, and moved the VIP toward the safest exit. Another attacker appeared from the side. Joon-Ho had already seen him coming. He guided the VIP around the corner, closed a security door, and kept moving. The attackers followed, but Joon-Ho never lost control. Finally, he reached the safe zone and placed the VIP behind the security barrier. The buzzer sounded, "Test over." Marcus walked toward him slowly. "How did you see that first guy?" he asked. Joon-Ho shrugged. "He wasn't watching the building, he was watching the people." Marcus smiled. "That's the difference." The other candidates stood quietly. They had spent the entire week trying to prove they were stronger, faster, and tougher. Joon-Ho had barely spoken. He didn't need to. He understood something they had missed. A bodyguard's greatest weapon isn't always a fist. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's awareness. Sometimes it's knowing when not to fight. Marcus looked at Joon-Ho and said, "You weren't the strongest man here." Joon-Ho nodded. Marcus continued, "That's exactly why you're the one I want." For the first time, Joon-Ho smiled. But before he could respond, Marcus handed him an envelope. Inside was something Joon-Ho hadn't expected, a job offer that could completely change his daughter's future. Joon-Ho stood quietly in Marcus Reed's office, holding the envelope in both hands. After everything that had happened during the tryout, he still wasn't sure what was inside. He had come to Blackstone Security looking for one steady job, nothing more. He never expected the same people who had laughed at him to now be waiting for Marcus to announce the final decision. Marcus sat behind his desk and looked at Joon-Ho for a moment before saying, "You got the position." Joon-Ho didn't celebrate. He simply let out a slow breath, almost as if he had been carrying that worry for months. "Thank you," he said. Marcus smiled. "There's more." He opened another folder and explained that Joon-Ho had scored higher than every other candidate in the final protection test. His fighting ability had impressed them, but that wasn't why they chose him. What mattered most was his judgment. He had understood the one thing the other candidates kept forgetting. The job wasn't about looking powerful. It was about making sure someone else stayed safe. Marcus then told him the company wanted to offer him a senior protection position after a short training period. The pay was far better than Joon-Ho expected, and the schedule would allow him to spend more time with Hana. Joon-Ho looked down at the paperwork. For the first time that week, his eyes became emotional. "I only applied for the basic position," he said. Marcus replied, "After watching you, I don't think you belong at the basic level." Then Marcus called Tsu into the office. The strongest fighter walked in looking different from the confident man who had challenged Joon-Ho the day before. He stood in front of Joon-Ho and lowered his head slightly. "I owe you an apology," Tsu said. "I judged you before I knew anything about you." Joon-Ho shook his head. "You don't owe me anything," Tsu smiled. "You dropped me in 3 seconds. I think I owe you at least a little respect." Joon-Ho laughed softly. The tension between them finally disappeared. Tsu then asked, "Where did you learn that move?" Joon-Ho answered, "A long time ago. But I hope you never have to use it for real." Tsu understood what he meant. Outside the office, the other candidates were still talking about what they had witnessed. The man they had called Dad had walked into the academy looking like the weakest person there, yet he had walked out with the best offer. Joon-Ho left the building with the job papers tucked safely inside his backpack. Before getting into his car, he pulled out his phone and called Hana. "Daddy," she answered. "Did you get the job?" Joon-Ho smiled. "I did." There was silence for a moment. Then Hana shouted with excitement, "I knew you could do it." Joon-Ho looked toward the academy and smiled. He had spent the whole week proving strangers wrong, but that wasn't what mattered to him. All that mattered was knowing that when he went home that night, he could finally tell his daughter that things were going to be okay. Still, Joon-Ho didn't know that the biggest surprise of his new job was waiting for him. That evening, Joon-Ho drove home with the job offer sitting safely on the passenger seat. For the first time in months, he wasn't thinking about overdue bills, rent, or how he was going to give Hana the life she deserved. He was simply looking forward to seeing his daughter. When he opened the front door, Hana ran toward him with a smile. "Daddy, did you get it?" she asked. Joon-Ho knelt down and hugged her tightly. "I got it." Hana smiled proudly and jumped into his arms. She didn't care about the 3-second fight, the difficult tests, or the people who had laughed at her father. To her, he was simply Dad. They sat together at the kitchen table that night, eating a simple dinner while Joon-Ho told her about the new job. He didn't tell her about the dangerous parts of his old life. He didn't tell her that he had once protected important people or that he could drop a trained fighter before most people could blink. He only told her that Daddy had found a good job. Hana looked at him and said, "I knew you would." Those 4 words meant more to Joon-Ho than any trophy ever could. Later that night, after Hana went to bed, Joon-Ho stood by her bedroom door and watched her sleep. He thought about how much his life had changed. Years ago, he had walked away from a world filled with danger because he wanted his daughter to grow up without fear. He never wanted to be a fighter again. He never wanted people to admire him for being strong. He simply wanted to be a father who came home every night. But sometimes life doesn't give people the easy choices they want. Sometimes a parent has to step back into an old world just to protect the future of their child. The next morning, Joon-Ho arrived at Blackstone Security wearing his new suit. The same men who had laughed at him now greeted him with respect. Tae-soo even smiled and gave him a small nod. Marcus walked over and handed him his first assignment. "Ready?" he asked. Joon-Ho looked at the file, then at the photograph of Hana inside his wallet. "Always," Marcus smiled. Joon-Ho walked toward the elevator, but before the doors closed, he looked back at the training room where everything had started. He remembered the jokes, the insults, and the moment everyone thought he was the weakest man there. Then he smiled. He hadn't defeated Tae-soo to prove he was better. He had done it because he knew exactly what was at stake. Joon-Ho never wanted to be a hero. He didn't need a crowd cheering for him. He didn't need anyone to call him the strongest. He was just a father who refused to let his daughter struggle alone. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one carrying the strongest reason to keep going. Because real strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about who you're willing to stand up for when the whole world tells you to walk away.